Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 1 o'clock today, and I would like to acknowledge that this meeting today is taking place on traditional territories of the Huspekstat Nation and the Taschat First Nation. I acknowledge that committee members are joining in from other areas and communities that are the traditional territories of the Nuu-chah people. I would also like to identify to the attendees and to delegates that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube on the Regional District website. And I'd like to start by doing the introduction and having folks both here in the boardroom and online introduce themselves. And I'll start. I am Bob Beckett. I'm the chair of the committee, and I represent Area A, Bamfield, on the ACRD. And I'll turn to Daniel on my left, and then we'll go clockwise, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Sayan, the Chief Administrative Officer for the Alberni Regional District.
Hi, I'm Dan Law, Mayor of Tofino. It's great to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Colin Cosman, Land Use Forester with Mosaic Forest Management.
Hello, Jolene Dick, CEO, Alberni Valley Chamber of Commerce.
Good afternoon, Dean Fauchon, Sawakin Forestry.
Hi, Zoran Knezovic from Port Alberni Tourism.
Mike Sparrow, I'm Cherry Creek Regional Rep, and I'm ACRD Board Rep as well.
Good afternoon, John McNabb, citizen of Port Alberni.
Cindy Silva, City Council, City of Port Alberni.
Charlene Harrison, Assistant Administrator.
Thank you. And we'll go online, starting with Josh, please.
I still don't hear anybody.
Hi, Josh Jenkins, Executive Director of the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce, calling from the Ucluelet Nation territory.
Yeah, I'll see what happens here. Okay.
Thank you. Ken, you're having trouble hearing us?
No, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
Oh, okay, good. Well, go ahead, Ken. Why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Ken McCrae. I think I was on the Link Highway route in the 90s. So that's a long time. And then for when I was mayor, me and Jack Peak from Lake Cowichan, we were chairman of the highway committee from Cowichan to Port Alberni and also to Courtenay. So it's been a long time since I was involved in it. And we just about got there one time. When we were looking at the route going through the Horn Lake, and when Charlie Haggard was still with us, we were awful close for getting that route going through. I even took my wife, who was First Nations, I took her to the Qualicum Indian Band. We had a meeting with them. So we were just about there. And then the interest kind of lost. So I sit on the Island Corridor Foundation for the rail line too. I represent the regional district on that. I've been on there since we started the Island Corridor Foundation. So there's another out too. So there's lots of things, lots of history, but we have to get a route out of here somehow. So.
Well, welcome, Ken. You weren't able to do it the last time around, but I'm confident that with your support and historical perspective, you'll help us get there this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlene Harrison.
That's right beside me.
Oh, right. Sorry. Heather Zenner.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather Zenner, Manager of Administrative Services. And I just did want to mention that Denise Stiles Norman, she was a member at large. She did step down recently, and that she has been replaced with Ken McCrae. So the board appointed Ken, and that's why he's joining us for the first time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Marilyn.
Good afternoon, Marilyn McEwen, Mayor of Ucluelet, coming to you from the territory of the Ucluelet.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jen, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jen Dart, Acting Executive Director for the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. As it says on my name there, I will be leaving in February. We have named Samantha Hockett as the person who's going to take over in this executive director role, she will be in place mid-March. So hopefully for the next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Good luck in your new endeavors. Michael Pearson.
Good afternoon. Mike Pearson. I'm the district manager for Vancouver Island District with the Ministry of Transportation.
Thanks, Mike. You were a little bit broken there. It wasn't real loud. Maybe you could just try that again for an audio for us, please.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me better now. Mike Pearson, district manager for Vancouver Island District with the Ministry of Transportation.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael. And you may be introducing somebody else a little bit later on this afternoon. Have I missed anybody? Well, again, I'd like to thank you all for participating on this beautiful Friday afternoon. I'd like to start by going to item number 2, approval of the agenda. Does
Move approval of the agenda.
moved by John, and I assume that's seconded by Cindy. Is there any discussion, anything needed to be added at this point in time? If not, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Approved, pass. Thank you very much for that. Item number 3, Transportation Advisory Committee meeting held October 31st. And if I could get approval for the minutes of that committee meeting that was held on the 31st.
Move to adopt.
Move to adopt by Cindy, seconded by John. Discussion? All in favor? Pass. Thank you very much. Item number 4A is a letter from Rob Fleming, Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. I'll turn it over to Daniel first to speak to it, and then I'll carry on from there. Thank you.
Well, the regional district had provided a letter, I believe it's also attached, that we wrote to Mr. Fleming with regards to the impacts of Highway 4 and looking to work with the ministry proactively towards resolving this issue. We received a formal letter from the minister, which is I think is a high-level response acknowledging that it is an issue and that the ministry is looking into it. I think if I may, Mr. Chair, that what is better than the letter, because the letter doesn't really tell us a lot, is Michael. Michael is better than the letter, and I would perhaps recommend that unless there's direct questions on the letter, that we also consider maybe checking in with Michael and where the ministry, from his perspective, is currently acting, because I think that would be more informative.
Thank you, Daniel. I would agree. I had made some notes, and I know that others around the table and online have reached out to me and wanted to speak to the letter, but I do think there's incredible value, knowing what we know this morning, to have Michael speak to both the letter and to the steps that I'm so grateful to hear about moving forward. So, Michael, I'll turn it over to you, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So yeah, I guess in response to the letter, the ministry has been working, I've been working with our planning group, and we've actually got a consultant on board to begin work on the emergency detour route study. And you'll notice I used emergency detour route study. That's not a secondary route study, so it's not intended to look at a secondary highway, but it is looking at, it is intended to look at the various options, the various route options from an emergency detour perspective. So that would be a lot of technical analysis on what those roads look like, the constraints, the potential improvements that may be needed to be able to use those. And it's really kind of foundational work that may be used for other studies and other purposes. So we have Parsons Engineering on board, and that is the second Michael Pearson you see online. I have Tim Murphy, who is the project manager with Parsons. And so we literally just got them on board this week. So they're not prepared to speak to anything today, but I did want them to be here to least do a bit of an introduction as well as just to hear the conversation that's going on. So that work will be getting started soon and is expected to take the remainder of the year to sort of complete. And I think that works well in conjunction with some of the other studies that are going on that I think Daniel and others can speak to. Maybe I'll pause for a second if there's any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee?
Just a comment, Ken McCray.
Go ahead, Ken.
So last week I stopped in to see our MLA at the time when we were doing all this work on another link. And I said, refresh my memory, George Jansen, about where the highway cutoff was supposed to be to Port Alberni when they put the island highway in. Because I remember you took me on your motorbike when the road was still gravel. And he says, yes, we went up to the Horn where the Horn Lake cutoff is there. There was a forestry road going down there. We went down that forestry road and there was a gate. And if you went through that gate, you would go into Lost Lake and then down through Cherry Creek. He says, this is going to be the cutoff to Port Alberni, not the cutoff that we ended up with. So it's kind of interesting. I said, why didn't they go with that, George? You're a good friend with Glenn Clark. You were roommates together. He says, because we ran out of money. There was too many bridges. So that was the first thing we cut was the cutoff to Port Alberni. So
thanks for that, Ken. I'll turn it over to Cindy and then I've got John next.
And just a quick question through the chair. The past studies that we have through the regional district, are you going to be combining them? Are you going to be looking at them and maybe something might come out of that? I'm just kind of curious by that because there's been a lot of studies.
Yeah, there has been a lot of studies, both from the ACRD as well as the ministry going back to the 90s. And so it's really taking all the work that's already been done. And that is really the first part of the assignment through Parsons, is to look at all the background documentation that already exists. There's no real sense in reinventing that. It's just building upon what we already have.
And John.
So when I first read this letter, I thought to myself, I could have wrote that letter without asking. It was pretty predictable, but I'm certainly happy to hear that there's background to it, and that then we're going to get an overview of the possibilities. I'd just like to remind the ministry that this last closure on the 24th, I believe it was, Christmas, was highly problematic. It was highly problematic for the business sector. It was really a problem for the general citizens, and the fact that the ugly other route was not even really usable was really a big deal. My daughter happened to be the second car behind where that collision was, and ended up having to go Lake Cowichan route because of medication problems at home. And if they didn't have a power saw and a heavy duty 4-wheel drive, they wouldn't have got through. And so it really is something we need to address. We need to come up with a solution. That area around Camera Lake and Cathedral Grove is not going to get more stable. Climate change is going to change Cathedral Grove to an absolute landmine of falling trees, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we have to look at solutions, and I'm glad that's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm going to go back to Daniel, Zoran, and then Cindy, please. So Daniel.
I'll just flag. I'll take a bit of heat off Michael on that one. I think in the ministry's defense, when things closed down, the ministry had already been very clear that there was no maintained alternative route. And what we had actually worked on is a scenario with EMCR where people would actually have access to hotels and whatnot. And I think what ended up prompting people to do the alternative route, unfortunately, is that EMCR did not uphold their end We were severely delayed as an EOC as a result on both sides, the regional district, Nanaimo, and ourselves, because we were waiting for task numbers and clarity and whatnot. So it was not seamless. We were almost 2 hours late. By then, most people traveled the route that MOTI was saying, please don't travel this route. Yeah, we did follow up with the ministry. We are having, not the Ministry of Transportation, but with the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Resilience to follow up. And yeah, so that was frankly an embarrassment, given all of the work that we put into exactly that scenario. To have it fall apart on Christmas night, that's just absurd. And you know what we ended up doing on that front is that the ACRD, I approved an interim budget so we could put people over here up into a hotel. Unfortunately, the RDN was not prepared to make that leap, so they did not. So our folks got a hot cup of coffee and told to either drive or sleep in the cars. We had a very small number of people by the time we got organized. We had 5 people come through. Subsequently, the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Resilience reimbursed our expenses after the fact, even though they said they wouldn't. Yeah, no, that was, you're absolutely correct. And I think, John, when you and I spoke, you're absolutely correct in saying that this does nothing for helping investment in business in the area, because people get the message of it's too volatile. And I never followed up with Tofino to see how many cancellations occurred for New Year's as a result of the Christmas closure. But it's exactly the kind of stuff that we can't have happen. And I think this is why our discussions, even if it's for an emergency route, I know for us, I'll talk about a little later on permanent highway versus emergency, but even if it's just emergency, I think that is light years ahead of where we currently are.
Thank you, Danielle. Duran, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael, I predominantly focus on you. I'm not sure if you're aware about BAIA, Vancouver Island Economic Alliance, is doing a transportation study. If you are aware, are you going to use something like that as part of your review process? As you mentioned earlier, we have done a number of studies in the past. I think personally, in my opinion, the landscape has changed and the world has changed since then. And as Ken mentioned, in the 90s and 80s, and God knows how long we have tried to get the second route here. I think we are in different environment, and with Banfield route or Banfield opening up, I strongly believe that the alternate route to Port Alberni is required. For the growth of the economy and also for the growth of the region and so on and so forth. So question first, are you going to use a study that BAIA is working on? And the second, what do we need to do, in my opinion, and the question for myself, and I'm not sure if I represent everybody else around the table, what do we need to do in order for us to consider the alternate route to Port Alberni? And is there an option for us to proceed that?
So as part of our study, no, it will not include an economic analysis, but I think if there is another study going on currently, certainly we can take a look at that. I really see this as a technical exercise. As I said, in terms of engineering, to look at what is needed on this route in order to make it viable and safe for all public use in the event of an emergency detour. And as I said, that information will be helpful for others as well if you do want to proceed down business casing and others for routes or for further upgrades. Well, I think I answered you. I think I don't know if there was the second part to that question that I missed, but
so second part is the alternate route. What do we need to do in order for ministry to consider the alternate route?
In terms of an alternate, like a secondary alternate route, a full highway, I don't think that's something that the ministry is considering right now. I think, as I said, the study is really focused on emergency management. So I see that as the first step, and then proceeding to a secondary route, I think, will come with a lot more economic analysis, as you suggested. But that's just not something that I've been tasked to do yet. So.
Thank you.
Just before I go to Cindy, Mike, and John, I'm just going to jump in. I had flagged earlier in Minister Fleming's letter where he identifies in the second paragraph, I know the closures of the highway due to wildfire at Cameron Lake Plus have been extremely challenging for business residents and travelers. The one thing that I've been advocating from day one is trying to get a handle on the social economic impact. And, we've alluded to it. We've talked about, hotels not being open, nurses not getting into work, et cetera, et cetera. And, Zoran just talked about a study that's going on. I'm at a bit of a loss, quite frankly, as to how many studies there are, what the focuses are. And as I said to Daniel last night in our phone conversation in preparation for the day, is we don't need to be duplicating things. We need to be consolidating. We need to, be determining very clearly what the steps are. I'm absolutely thrilled, Michael, that Minister Fleming, has agreed to move, your work forward. It doesn't, deal with the alternate route as an example, but we're going to talk about that. So I just want to jump in and say, excuse me, but I am struggling. And I think from a staffing perspective, I'd like to see us recommend to staff to try to figure out who's doing what and what those studies are, so that we can take advantage of all the good work that's going on. So with that, I will turn it over to, I think I had said Cindy, Mike, and John.
Thank you. It's interesting because all the studies that I have been involved with since 2002 would be an alternate route out of Port Alberni. It was never an emergency route. I mean, it was kind of tied in with it because if you have the alternate, you still have an emergency out, a two-way out, right? So take a look at those studies in there, and yeah, it's kind of interesting how that worked. There was business cases presented for Port Alberni in some of those studies. I believe the last one that was done, this business case was there, but the ministry said, hey, we're not going to build because unless there's we lose $2 million of business wants to come in, and it's a really high-end business, and that you give us the reason for that, right? And maybe we'll look at it. That was sort of tossed around in there. Anyways, but that's not what I want to talk about. What I also the city would love an alternate route, definitely. It was interesting at our first meeting. I think, Michael, you were here on our first meeting. We talked about Highway 4 when we talked about the winter was coming, and there was worry, concern about the winter and closure. That I believe it was you that said, oh no, or somebody said to us that the route is actually better now before the fires. And I went, okay, great. And so the people in the community were talking about it. And I said, oh, no. The ministry has promised that it's better pre-fire. And I went, oh, okay, don't worry about it, everybody. You'll be fine. And what happened? We closed the highway. Did I look like I was dumb there? And I automatically text the CAO here, and he said, yeah, I was going to ask the same question. What happened to that? We were better than pre-fire. So I wanted to bring that up. So anyways, where I want to go is that when we talk about the highway now, and there was discussion too about the barriers. The barriers are great, that's there, but a lot of people have concerns that if, where are the signs? What happened to the signs during the Highway 4 closure for the fires? Because those signs are really, I think, should be put back, because if you have 30, 40 people in a lineup and people are stopped, obviously the traffic stops, so everybody stops, but they don't know what's going on unless the signs are put further back where as people get onto the highway, and instead of doing a UE, because cop out to do a UE, I think that those signs should go back. And the electronic signs. And even up by Coombs Country Candy, hey, the highway up there is closed. People can actually turn around. And, you know, in the summertime, it's going to get worse, the traffic. I was just at the Chamber of Commerce had an economist come and do a presentation. And she said one thing is tourism is coming back to Vancouver Island. We get 1,000 people coming through here, no, 1 million people through the summer coming through Port Alberni and going to the West Coast or to Port Alberni, more so to the West Coast. Let's give them credit here. And that sucks for the tourists if they don't know what's going on, because the tourists come to Vancouver Island, they don't know that the highways, how long the delays are going to be. We have it for the West Coast. Going to the West Coast, there's an electronic sign. So I believe that I would recommend to this committee, let's push for electronic signs, but further away where people can actually turn around and not get to a point where there's nothing. And the other thing, complaints we heard was when the traffic is stopped, there's no washrooms. There's a washroom right at the site, but if you're in the lineup for 2 or 3 hours, well, the bush, I guess, is where you're going to go. But the thing is, there's those things too. So there needs to be another washroom. So I'm just putting that out there to you. Sorry, Michael, I ramble a lot, but it's what I recommend. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Michael, I'm going to turn it to Daniel for a response. And then if you have anything to add with respect to the signage and whether there's a potential for some permanent signage. And I will jump in again, because I always try to pay, credit where credit's due. When Highways did set up the alternate route, the Banfield Cowichan, they did put up stops and washrooms, and that was really helpful for those folks that, had to deviate from that. I'll turn it over to Daniel, and then I'll go back to you, Michael, for comment.
Thank you. And again, there's been so many moving parts since December 25th that this is probably good that we're having a discussion, because even though Michael and I got to check in, Michael, we did not talk about signage. I have had meetings around signage. They started with Josie Osborne and her team. She really relayed that back out. And I do have Nikki from the ministry that has reached out to say, okay, let's talk about these signs. So that is one of my upcoming meetings to talk about signage upgrades and how we can change that. There's only one element that Cindy, you didn't hit that we flagged. And so if and when we have to close again, it's for the signs of when those gates come down. It's to make sure that locally we have some element of participation. So whether that be our fire departments or whatever, take the lead in closing those barriers, so that through agreement with the ministry, if that can be achieved, so that at that moment our EOC can be directly notified, and in that moment an appropriate magnetic sign that would just go on a blank metal slate on that barrier can point people towards the website, the number, and the appropriate, depending on what the emergency is, the appropriate response that we're then setting up as an EOC, so that people that are getting up there physically that may not have cell reception or whatnot know exactly what's going on. So we would have a plethora of optional signs that they can then put up on both sides, one pointing back towards the RDN, one pointing back towards us. So we're going to have those discussions on signage, and we're going to have discussions with the MCR as well. So I just want to say that we should keep that as a standing item, so we keep the discussion. But I wasn't sure that Michael was aware of those meetings, so I wanted to put in a word.
Thank you. Stand by, Michael, because Cindy wants to jump in, and I'm happy to have her jump in.
So my response to that sign on the barriers is not enough, because it's so close to highway, to the Cameron Lake. It needs to go back further. We need a further one as you're getting up to the hump, or coming where the gas station burned down in Coombs. It just needs more, and that's not enough. So, but I love your idea, because you're right. Cell services, the pits out there, and you're lucky you got it. Thank you.
Thank you both, Daniel, Cindy. I'm hoping Michael's gonna say, hey, Bob, we've already got this sorted out. The permanent signs are going up in this location here. Go ahead, Michael, over to you.
Boy, did I ever wish I could say that, but no, not yet. So maybe a few things that just going back to Cindy's comments. The fact that we're better than we were before the forest fire, and that is still true. As you can see through the events that we've been through this winter with the rains from the fall and even this most recent series of atmospheric rivers, the slope has held up very, very well. Even that really unfortunate event on the 24th, 25th, that was a relatively minor rockfall in a tree, which we were able to clean up quickly. The reason it was closed overnight is because we had to assess the slope before in the daylight hours. But overall, like that's not to be unexpected on Highway 4 in any winter, even pre-fire, where we may have to close on occasion for a small incident like that. So just want to remind that it's not that Highway 4 will never have an incident on it like that, but we haven't seen any increase in frequency. In regard to the DMS boards, the signs, digital message boards, message signs, that's a ministry acronym, DMS. I wasn't aware of the conversations were going on, but that's great to hear. And I think it is something that the ministry is totally supportive of looking into and where those could go. I think your suggestion at Whiskey Creek and maybe one around Coombs Country Candy would make some sense. But I think looking into those makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Michael. Director Sparrow, you have patiently been waiting to jump in. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for that. This question, of course, is to Michael. He said that Parsons Engineering is going to do consultant on the road with by the end of the year with a recommendation for an emergency route, and not about the alternate route, but we'll get all the consultation process together, all packed together. So my question is, at the end of the year, when he's finished his recommendations on the emergency route, are you going to pursue that and make it open so we can proceed forward? Or are you going to just end there the consultation process, throw it back to the board here, and we're going to do some lobbying to get the emergency route opened up, and also looking at an alternate route further down the road?
It's not possible. I can't say. I think in terms of emergency route, the recommendation that will come from the report will sort of validate this is the route that we're going to use in the event of an emergency. Any further investment or further advancement of using that as a secondary route is still to be determined. And that will be something that comes out of the study is what does that look like in terms of cost, and what does that look like in terms of steps. But really the first recommendation coming out of in terms of which is the preferred route is something that we could be using anytime that the highway would be closed for an extended period of time.
Does that mean at the end of the report that you will take that emergency route and put it up to a classification where it can be drivable for all vehicles as soon as that road is closed, up to including chip seal on Banfield Road? Or is this going to be put on paper and left as is?
I don't think it's going to be put on paper and left as is, but I think the question is what level of investment is needed, and what does that look like? I can't predict how much that I can't predict how much investment will go in at the end of the study just yet, because we don't know what that looks like.
Thanks, Michael. I even before you put your hand up, Daniel, I was going to turn to you, because whether it's item 6A terms of reference, or whether it's the budget and work plan, perhaps we can start to move in that direction. But go ahead.
Thank you. And they're great questions. And I just wanted to add in beyond what Michael's saying is that I just want to say that I really appreciate the fact that, Michael, you're a part of this. But I also want to remind and just point out that you are ministry staff, and significant elements of the work we have as communities is going to be political, and that's just not the domain like we want it. What I appreciate is that we'll be in a position to actually have some pretty good costs and understanding of the kind of upgrades that need to occur just to bring it up, different routes up to an emergency standard. That would lead us into discussions at this committee level, which is going to take place under 7A, which is talking about specifics that we're hoping to have as part of our work plan, because it's budget season, and I'm presenting to the board, budgets to match a work plan. And so obviously, if we had a $10,000 budget, it won't get us very far. The fact that Michael has a budget and is going to be doing a lot of the analysis on the road is actually going to save us a lot of money. So I appreciate that. And I'll flag one other element that's important to remember, although it's not directly related to our work. The ACRD does have a grant, and we are hoping that the board on Wednesday will support the implementation of that grant to hire HDR, a consultancy firm, to look at the rail, how it is that we could engage rail, and they will actually be looking at the economic scenario based on rail, but also have flagged the impact of the highway closure. That was part of what they flagged in terms of the context. So they're aware of the context that they would have to be working in, and they are aware of the fact that they would be likely presenting to this committee as well. Now, their focus is going to be rail because that's what the grant is. But the fact that the company has worked with the ministry, is aware of the closure, and that to be able to understand rail, they need to do the economic analysis of the impacts of rail, and that I think is an opportunity for us to sort of slide into that one and say, what does it mean if there's no highway, if we're fully shut down? And I know there's work being done there, but we're really going to try and pull all those threads together as everyone is doing work so that we can just do the minimal amount of work to push it from there to where we need it. And I'll come back to that perhaps on 7A, but appreciate that I could flag that, and just want to make sure, Michael, that you're not put into a position of making political commitments when your, I believe your mandate is to collect accurate data on costs so that the ministry can then consider a budget.
Yes, thanks, Daniel. Yes, I cannot make political commitments. No.
That is correct, and we understand that. Certainly, as I mentioned at our last meeting, and Daniel alluded to it, it's great having you on board and working alongside us, because we can't do it without MOTI involved. And I think I really appreciated Mike's question, because his approach to find out where this is going. Again, we don't, as Ken McRae alluded to, we don't want to be doing study after study after study. We want to know what the outcome is going to be, and our board, ACRD board, each time we meet, which is twice a month, the board is adamant that we find some tangible steps moving forward. So, Mike's question was good, and Michael, we would never put you in that really, really uncomfortable spot. Maybe just a little uncomfortable from time to time, but I appreciate your candid response and giving us your direction, because we do have to manage this both from an operational standpoint as well as from a political standpoint. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Michael, with respect to the work that you're doing and next steps, and any advice or thoughts for us from a communication standpoint, for our board, for our partners who are with us on this committee, and for the community?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think, a couple things. I'm happy to share the terms of the work plan that we have with Parsons with the group, just to you can see what we're having them do and what that looks like. Also, in terms of community engagement, we really, for this assignment, we're really hoping to be able to use this committee as that point of contact. We don't expect to be doing anything beyond this at this point, unless perhaps you think that there would be value in going, maybe perhaps to some specific groups. But yeah, in terms of engagement, I'm really looking to hopefully use this committee as the point of contact for that.
Great. Daniel, do you mind jumping in and just what your thoughts are from a communication standpoint, communications with the board, just so that we can kind of wrap it up now and finish this part of it?
So following up on that, I think Michael's approach is a good one. This committee is diverse enough in its constitution to be able to report back out to appropriate boards and councils to keep that conversation going. And interested parties, obviously, whether that be the Port Authority or the forestry companies. I think this is a good basis for that engagement. I think where general public outreach comes into play, that'll be something that we would, as a committee, recommend to councils and the ACRD board first, but obviously that would be a regional discussion on how and why. And that would come out of our work specifically. So that's where I would identify that. Again, I will flag, I'll just share some of the thoughts I have around communication. Because of the size of the work that we're doing, the ministry is doing, and I'll throw in rail, I think it's hard for us to have multiple conversations about transportation with the general public when there's so many pieces. So where my gut is going is we're all on a 12-month cycle. All of us are aiming to finish this work by the end of this year. And so where the ACRD does have a budget for a healthy budget for community outreach is in the rail portfolio through the provincial grant on rail. And we appreciate that. And outreach is compliant. So I would venture to say that if there is a larger public outreach portion, that we plan to do that through the outreach at the same time as rail and other things. So the general public can talk about transportation as it pertains to the region and can have that conversation of the alternatives and why the alternatives and economic impacts in that context, rather than having 3 or 4 side surveys. It would just be up to us to really sort of make sure that it's clear, that it's going to the right areas and answering the questions that we'd be hoping to have answered from the public.
Thanks, Daniel. John.
So I've got 2 questions. First of all, Ms. Dick was working on a study report with regards to the cost and to the businesses and the initial closure. And secondly, the road to the Lookout, which is from Coombs Country Candy over the Beaufort Hill there, was dug up during the initial closure, the initial 3-week closure. That road is a registered right-of-way. I don't know if anybody knows that or not, but it's registered right-of-way to the Cherry Creek Waterworks. I'm wondering if that's been put back. I'm not sure who dug it up, Ministry, Mosaic, whoever, but first of all, it's a very well-used recreational road. And secondly, it's an alternative road in a case of an actual real emergency. So I'd like to get an answer to that. And my statement to all of this is the cost of doing nothing is too high. My estimation is that it costs the community and the businesses in the Alberni-Claycourt Regional District about $200 million. I think that every person that I've talked to wants a resolution. I haven't talked to one person that says, nah, it's good enough. So I think we need to keep that in mind.
John, can you repeat the first question for clarity for me?
That question was to Ms. Dick with regards to the Chamber of Commerce study with regards to that cost to the business of the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you for the question. I don't have the exact cost. So where we're at is we got our funding from Island Coastal Economic Trust. And we just signed the agreement recently, but we did hire Whistler Center to do a situation analysis and leading practices research. So the survey data that we did collect has been sent to them to review and summarize and do out the themes. The West Coast communities, I believe they combined their, the economic loss to $44 million. For the Alberni Valley, that's undetermined. We weren't confident in applying the same kind of formula to come up with any type of number, because the number of businesses licenses in Port Alberni, there's the city issued licenses, and then there's just the Alberni Valley in general, and we don't know how many are in the regional district. I don't think you do business licensing, so we don't have that number. We will be doing informant interviews with larger employers to get more data to understand the loss, but it's millions of dollars, of course. And I think your estimate is probably spot on. So we will be doing our informant interviews this month, and coming up with our recommendations. I agree, there are a lot of reports going on, and I think I talked to Daniel at the end of the last meeting is we should probably come up with a little bit of an organizational chart of who's doing what and who's doing that where. Just kind of map out, we have lots of layers here of a secondary route for emergency, and then the secondary route for just quality of life and economic purposes. So thank you. I hope I answered your question.
I just might add that figure of $200 million one way or the other is absolutely unrecoverable. It's like it's lost dollars. And even in my small business, it's problematic. That you went through a basically about a 4-month period that income was drastically reduced and unrecoverable. I mean, most business situations you can get it back, but not this time.
Thanks, John. Before I go to Cindy, I'm gonna call upon Jen. You've got your hand up. I'll go to Cindy.
Thanks so much. Just a really quick comment, just off the last comment. Not only is that money unrecoverable, but their future earnings lost are really difficult to calculate. But I can tell you that we're having the softest shoulder season we've had in over a decade. So I think the ripple effects continue economically.
Thank you, and I'll reiterate, unless we have the hard data, we just spinning our wheels with respect to this. And Jolene, I appreciate the work you're doing, and it's absolutely critical that we get as accurate and both social and economic. I'm going to go to, I think it's Cindy, and then Colin, please.
Just a quick comment. The data that Jolene has not totally presented, or we have no data on, is what happened on the rest of the island. I know, talking to businesses like in Nanaimo and that, they were like, one business was 30% loss from Port Alberni. I mean, it's great for our community itself, shop in your own community, but some of the stuff you can't get in our community. So if you went through the whole island and did a survey, I bet it would be in the millions too. So I just want to put that in line too. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to comment about the comment about the road being deactivated, and that was in the works before the fire started. Just to remind people, the fire did start from an illegal activity during fire ban, so hikers walking away from a fire essentially. But there's certainly limited resources during an extreme wildfire risk on Vancouver Island and in this area. And Mosaic decided to deactivate that section of road for two reasons. One is because there was an illegal activity in the area with ORVs, and that is within the Elkford Springs area, which some people draw their water from that area. But also one of the risks during the summer and while the fire was being fought was that we certainly didn't want to see another fire start in the area, just because we'd already had limited activity and limited resources. So that was already partially planned. And when the fire started, because of all the motorized vehicles using that area, that decision was made to manage the risk around that illegal activity. So I don't believe, it depends if we're talking about the same area, but the area we deactivated is on our lands. I don't believe there's an easement there, but again, it's for managing environmental risks and the risk of another wildfire in that area. So I just wanted to share that information.
My information is from a very good source that it actually is a registered right of way. And for the Cherokee Waterworks, and the reason for it was to access Lacey Lake from the backside, you know, in case there was some problem with getting through with the other way. So I'm not quite sure that closing that road with that right of way, and even closing it to the degree it was closed that it's virtually impassable, that it helps the community in any way. And that road's been, I was a kid hiking up there when I was 10 years old, and you know, it's the risk of having a forest fire is always there, and we can't eliminate that risk at all. I mean, really, you close that road, there's another road. But that particular one, I know that a lot of families like to go up to the lookout area and have a picnic or just have a look, and that's been eliminated. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Maybe I can just add that access is still there for people to go up to the lookout and enjoy that area. Mosaic does work with all the water purveyors, including the Cherry Creek folks, with frequent meetings through the year and sharing information. They do have access to that area. So happy to chat with you more after the meeting if you like.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's a right of way, but Colin, we can also verify and have that conversation. I know that we've been able to have some regular check-ins with Mosaic as well. And yeah, if there's any way of resolving issues, then certainly it's going to be through dialogue. So we'll get that information and take that to a side table if that's okay.
Absolutely. I was just about to jump in anyway and identify that coming out of 4A, we do have a motion that the Transportation Committee received correspondence item A. So if I could have that motion, please. John moved and Mike seconded. I got to get Mike to do something, Cindy. Now coming out of that conversation, lengthy conversation, rich conversation, and very much appreciated, Michael, the support from the minister and the government. There may be some things that we're going to discuss in the next couple of items, especially 7. But let's go to 6A, request for decision. And that's an amendment to the Transportation Advisory Committee terms of reference, specifically dealing with identifying an alternate route as a secondary route as opposed to an alternate route. But I'll turn it over to you briefly, just to brief us on this, please, Daniel.
Did you want me to speak to it, Daniel?
Yeah, Heather, we just realized we don't have 5. It was missing item 5, so it would be 6, and that is you. So I'll give it back to Bob. So we were just figuring out our notes.
I would move the motion.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder, and then we'll go back to Heather and Cindy seconds that. Heather, do you mind speaking to this terms of reference, please?
No. So at the last Transportation Committee in October, there was a request to modify the scope of work laid out in the terms of reference. So a statement was added to section 3.1, just further clarifying that the scope of work related to the Alberni Valley will include an emergency route and a permanent second route. So if the committee is happy with that resolution that's presented in the staff report, you could make that motion. And if so, then I will bring it to the board for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So just for clarification, on page 13 of your agenda 3.1, so it was simply not simply, it was essentially adding and a permanent second route. Is that correct, Ed?
That's correct.
Perfect. Go ahead, Sven, please. I think the motion has been moved and seconded, so it's just a vote. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you very much. Item number 7A, the 2024 budget and work plan. And Danielle, I'll get you to jump in on that, please.
Thank you. So on this one, this year, the ACRD presented what we call PICs, proposed case initiatives, to the board. We did this just to help break down and identify budgetary elements that are outside of core business, and just to confirm and establish a budget, because it is budget season. So one of the picks this year was this transportation committee scope, and in the overview, we identified a number of different things that we are aiming to do with this committee. So we have a literary review of the various research initiatives and alternate route explorations that were done in the past, an analysis or assembly and analysis of some of the socioeconomic impacts that are taking place from different sources. We looked at doing a high-level cost-benefit analysis of route options, and well, we went in a lot of directions. How big we could go, the sky's the limit. Now, at the time of creating this, we didn't know. We knew that Michael was working on bringing in a consultant. We didn't know what the scope of that consultant would actually be, and so where we started was with a budget of 70,000, and that budget was really help facilitate these meetings, help collect existing information and assemble it. We now know that Michael's going to be working on information, so in this case, that would be part of the information that is brought in. There would be the element of also identifying the gaps. So we know the chamber is working on impacts. We know that Community Futures and through ICE-T that we will be collecting elements of social impact as well. We didn't talk yet about the health impacts in terms of medicines and people with appointments, but all that would be considered. And where we're missing information, we'd identify those gaps for future studies if we deem them to be important to the big picture. But there are two elements that I really felt were core to the work that we would do this year. And one of those elements is the construction of a business case. We know that the province has many scenarios like ours, communities with one road in, one road out, and a bunch of forestry roads that may or may not be engaged. And so, so we know that we'll be competing against other interests to see permanent alternative routes beyond just emergency routes. So, so to do that, we really feel that a business case talking about economic impact, social impacts is really going to be important, because that will help the province prioritize who moves first. I don't think there's any way the taxpayer would be able to afford everyone getting an alternative route across the province. So the question is, why is ours more important than somebody else's? And that is going to be, I think, a core element of what we do. The second element of that is what we do with that information. And, you know, Michael, you might want to earmuff here, but I'm going to bring up that word lobbying. The reality is that good information is useless on its own. Good information that lands in the right hands, in front of the right eyes and ears at the right time, is really where we start seeing changes. And we're going to have to work to make sure that we're being heard at the right tables, and that we remain top of mind. And when future budget discussions occur for a permanent reroute, that our valley is top of that list. At our last committee of the whole, our chair, John Jack, flagged that Huu-ay-aht had a budget of approximately 70,000 a year just for the lobbying part. And after a decade of that, so, you know, there's a chunk of change. they have their chip seal road. It's not unreasonable for us to think that we would be on a similar path. And so it does start with a solid business case, and then it would lead on towards a plan for how we would lobby and engage other levels of government in order to seek the change that we see. So part of bringing the pick here is the board wanted some further deliberation around, you know, what number should be there. Obviously, our taxpayers paying for whatever it is we choose to do. So it's an important decision, and trying to land it in the right area is important. And so we thought that this committee could talk about what elements ought to be included given what we know, and you know, is 70 too low, too high? Should we just have a facilitator come in and talk to us and assemble information, or do we go deeper into a business case development and lobbying strategy?
Thanks, Daniel, for that. You know, when you talk about business case lobbying, I was wishing the election wasn't until next year. But with that comment, I'll turn it over to Cindy.
Thank you. Regarding the business case, I really do agree with that. It's interesting because when business case was done in the past, there was no, we didn't have a blockade for the highway. We didn't have fires. We didn't have all this. So I think this is going to be a really interesting, it'll help with the business case. Also, when I look at healthcare as part of that business case, there was a lot of people, like it'd be interesting to hear what VIHA has to say, because how much did they spend because they flew their personnel into our community, plus other companies did the same thing. Then we have, even now, as of today, doctors and healthcare we need doctors. We have shortages of doctors in our community, and they're not going to come because they're scared about being, hey, how's the access in and out of our community? That's not just the main reason, but that's part of the whole equation. So I believe that we need to look at all that too. And but I support a business case, because if we're gonna go for, the city would like to see it, a second route out of our community. So thank you. Thank you.
Ken McCray.
Go ahead, Ken.
Just a couple of comments. When you're talking about the budget, when we wound up the Link Road committee, there was a Cowichan Regional District, Comox Regional District, and Alberni Clayoquot. We had a bit of money in the pot, and so we had to make a decision what we're going to do with it. And I talked them into giving it to the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District. I always wondered what happened to that money. So it's kind of interesting. Just a couple of things. I never received that letter from the minister. I know the minister really well. Him and I were president of labor councils at the same time. I was president of Alberni Clayoquot when the Clayoquot process was happening on Ucluelet and Tofino, and he was president of the labor council in Victoria. So I know him very well. I would like to see the letter that he sent. And of all the time that I was on the committees, we never talked about an emergency road. We wanted the same kind of road that, and this is one thing that we did succeed in doing. We got the road paved from Port Renfrew to Cowichan. And we wanted the same kind of road that went from there out of Port Alberni. So it was never, ever, did we ever talk about emergency road, or we probably would have left the committee. It wasn't to do with that. You know, it's a big thing. I think one of the things that we should do, since I've sit on the Island Corridor Foundation for the rail, we should get Larry Stevenson to come and make a presentation about where we're at with rail. I think it would be quite interesting. I've been on that committee for 15 years too, and I probably felt lots of times we have our ups and downs. Lots of time the provincial and federal government throws us underneath the train, but we're getting somewhere now, and with the First Nations, and I think it'd be worthwhile that we have him, our CEO, come and make a presentation. You know, John was saying about 200 million. It's a serious thing. I sat on another board where I'm involved with Catalyst, and I'm involved with the Sand Group. The Sand Group lost over $40 million. Catalyst was twice that much, because, you know, a couple of us are on the panel here. We worked in the paper mill. Every roll of paper is worth thousands of dollars these days. They can't take an emergency route. They just ruin all their facility. That's what happened to the sand and ruined their lumber. And it's a lot of money. They just about ran out of chips here. It was awful close. That would have shut down the pulp mill. That would have been millions of dollars every day. So it's a very serious thing. And we can't wait too long. We have to get our act together, and we have to do something that's worthwhile in a serious way. And we have to really get into the lobbying. There's no doubt about it. I did lots of lobbying in the past when I was mayor and when I was involved in politics in the union. And that's something that we have to do. We have to make sure we have enough dollars, and that the First Nations are doing an excellent job at lobbying now. So.
Thanks,
okay,
Ken.
that's about it.
Thanks, Ken. Good advice and good thoughts. I've got
Yeah.
John and then Zoran.
So I don't know if you need a motion with regards to this. But I would move that we concur with staff's recommendation of $70,000. I think that's a reasonable starting point. I mean, where by the time this all gets to the plate, it'll be March, and then as much as we get done in 2024, we may be looking into 2025. So there may be another opportunity there if we get enough momentum going. So I would move that.
And do I have a seconder for that? The mayor from Tofino has seconded that for us. Before we vote on that, we're going to have some additional discussion, including Zoran.
Very much in support, Daniel, of the business case. Just maybe as a frame of reference, Vancouver Island Economic Alliance is doing the transportation study, and I believe they're spending $1 million into it. So it is a lot of money. Yeah. And as you know, these studies may be done for maybe 50, maybe $1.05 million. So I'm not sure if the 72 is the right number, but I do I very much support if there's an avenue potentially as well to maybe get some funding either through Island Corridor Foundation and or potentially with us through a National Transportation Corridor Fund that we can maybe apply for something like that. And maybe just to add, I just went to a cruise ship symposium in Seattle, and I was very much overwhelmed with the economic impact of the cruise ship industry, and not to forget the fact of what we don't realize as a revenue when we have a road closure or difficulty accessing the community, but the potential loss that we could have and a growth that we could have from something like this. And I was blown away when one cruise operator tells me that Zoran would spend in Homeport just in provisions, just food, $120 million each year, each season. One cruise ship's, just for comparison, one cruise ship for 7-trip voyage, 4,000 passengers, orders 36,000 eggs, just eggs for one trip of 7 days. So I think there's a huge potential for growth that we are missing of having reliable access to the community, but also for the growth of the community as a whole, as the Lower Mainland seafood processing and aquaculture growth that we are experiencing here, that seafood processing facilities in Lower Mainland are closing because the cost of real estate is too high, that people don't want to keep their factories for processing seafood open when they can sell the same property for $50, $60, $100 million. So naturally they'll be looking for space to move, and the space to move, we see a lot of potential here in Port Alberni, especially with our access to water. So a reliable road access, an alternate route or secondary route, I think it's a must for us in our community in order to see the growth of this region as the population grows and as industry. So very much in support. And as I said, I'm sure I can do the study for 72,000, but if there's a way to get more money, we are willing to support that.
And just in response, yes, these things are usually much more expensive. And I think the saving grace that we have in this moment is that like Michael's already working on the technical analysis of what it would take to bring a road up to an emergency standard. So we at least have that, which is still a significant investment. And I'd be dumbfounded if it wasn't in and of itself a significant investment. But it's also recognizing that in doing or exploring the impact of rail, part of that contract is doing an economic analysis and exploring growth potential. So, and in my mind, I was hoping that if it's good enough for rail, we can translate it to highways. It does involve ports as well. And so we'll be like the budget I have to work with in that area is 600,000, 400,000 just on this first portion, but we did keep a surplus to deal with unexpecteds. And so you're absolutely correct in terms of the cost of doing these studies properly. My hope is that this amount really just helps us. It's a shoestring budget to pull the pieces of what other tables are going to be doing and advance it from there. So it's, yes, these things are not cheap, and we do have some grants, but we will look for more. And that is, I think, an excellent comment.
Yes, thank you for bringing that forward. I wasn't thinking, it was Daniel again earlier today that we were talking about rail and the value and benefit. But when you bring up the port, they all, roads, train, ships, it all ties in, and how important that is to not only our communities, but all communities. So to have that 30,000 foot view is very beneficial. So we have a motion. Shar, do you mind reading that motion out that John has proposed, please?
That the Transportation Advisory Committee recommend that ATRD hire consultant for the exploration and prioritization of the secondary.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, and if I can just,
Well done.
I just want to clarify, is it just for the secondary route, or does it include emergency and secondary route?
My understanding is that emergency is being covered by MOTI factually, so we should focus on a permanent alternate route. That's the business case that we would want to be developed.
My motion was actually to concur with staff's recommendation.
And forgive me as your chair, but again, I just want to make sure that it's part of that communications piece for both the board and the community, what we're doing. And in my little mind, I'm thinking, Michael's got everything in hand with respect to the emergency route. And that would be nice to check that off and have that as soon as possible. But at the same time, we're looking at a permanent secondary route. So am I thinking right here? And yeah, but this focus on this motion is to deal with a permanent secondary route. Perfect.
I concur with staff's recommendation.
I miss you, John. Go ahead.
For clarity, I think, John, are you making a motion that the Transportation Advisory Committee receives report A? Is that your motion? When you say staff's recommendation, okay. Just because I noticed that this was not included in our agenda package, but I went hunting for it, and I think that if you look in committee of the whole, on the PIC that the CIO has mentioned, it does go into further depth and details of the scope of their thing for $70,000.
Yeah, well, I was taking it from my iPad here, so.
Yeah.
However staff would like that word to make it work for them, that's fine. So do you want it to include both like a emergency and permanent route, or do you want the wording in there?
Sure. Let's go emergency and permanent. I mean, at the end of the day, we know that we can lean on the pieces that are happening, so there's no harm done. The 70,000 is really the number that I want to be able to go back to the board with and say, we've got a lot of work to do.
That's kind of what I was picking up on, was that the dollars were more important than the direction, but sure, if we want to add that for consideration of the primary and secondary route, or the emergency and primary route, that the $70,000 budget, that's fine.
I'm sorry if I've created a bit of a mess here, but I think when I think of lobbying, I think there may have to be some lobbying for a emergency route moving forward. So that's why I was looking for that clarification. And getting back to your question, Jolene, I'm looking at perhaps we do need a motion to accept the report, and we do need a motion then giving the board direction, the ACRD board direction to authorize to spend up to $70,000. So does that work?
Yeah, so we need two motions. So let's deal with the one we got on the table now, and then we'll go from there.
Oh.
Lobbying, no, I've heard two things. I've heard lobbying and consultants. So is this going to be, for lobbying directly, as in putting together a smaller group from this committee to perhaps go down to Victoria and lobby directly, or is this just for consultants? What's the, perhaps we need maybe a bit more?
Where this starts first is the assembly of the business plan, because you can't lobby without good information. And so, and we know that it's going to take a while to assemble all good information. So really the first step of consultancy is the construction of the business plan. And in that business plan, what I would hope to come out with is a lobbying strategy as well. Now I'm hoping that part of that lobbying strategy can be developed through HDR and the rail strategy, because it's going to be similar. But that said, we need to start with this. So it could be that we burn up the 70,000 on the business plan, and in which case then we'll explore other grants and other venues to lobby. But we're going to need help on the lobbying front, and similar to what John Jack had said, this is going to be a multi-year thing to get across the finish line. So what we need to do is set the stage. So I know I'm not being clear, so I'll make it clear. Business plan is the absolute must first, right? And next step is strategy for lobbying. Next step is lobbying. And we'll have to come back and talk about finances when we actually have firm quotes and firm work plans that allow us to get a better idea of overall numbers. But for now, what's on the table is this committee has moved and seconded a motion to recommend a budget of $70,000 to get started on that business plan for both an emergency and a permanent alternate route.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Dan? And Jolene, was there something that we need to clarify? I thought you had you looked at me and you went.
I think that the motion is fine, and I think it almost more or less covers off the same second motion that might be coming up. So second motion may not be necessary, is in my opinion, but if we need to, in due diligence, do both, I'm happy to.
Thank you very much, Saran.
Just a question, not to muddy up the water a little bit more with this one. Suggestion, just a suggestion. I know the motion is in the table. I'm not sure if we should mix secondary route and emergency route all in one package. One reason is, what if they're not the same route? What if they're opposing route? And are we going to mix that in a sense, in a way? So to me, for the better clarity, I would suggest we just have a secondary route as one business case study as standalone, And I think Daniel, clearly indicated that Michael Pearson is working on the emergency route, himself directly, and not us to get involved in that direction. So that's my suggestion. I'm just using this maybe as a more clarity, but it doesn't have to do that.
Appreciate your input. Cindy, please.
I think I agree with you on that because we're looking at the emergency route being finished by 2024. And I'm stressing that because you know how I feel about that. And with the alternate route, well, we know it might not be finished by 2024. And because, so I would agree with that. Let's take him out and make him as an individual. You know, we know we need the emergency route no matter what at this moment in time. But if 2025, 2026, we've been doing this since 2002. So who knows where we're going with this one. So let's take them out and do that.
I don't know. I think it's just phonetics. Like really, I mean, we've got a goal down the end of the road. And we know that the emergency route is sort of something that's in motion. We still need to support the emergency route. We need to push that ahead. And we need to think about the long term. So I think the motion's fine, quite frankly. I think we can encompass both. If our work favors one or the other, it favors both. So let's just run.
Thank you. So this is the will of the committee. Let's then, what is the motion then? How do you want that motion?
You want to read it back to what you got?
That the Transportation Advisory Committee recommend that ACRD hire a consultant for $70,000 for the exploration and prioritization of a secondary transportation route.
It's clear to me. You're good with that, sir?
Mud doesn't get clearer.
Let's call the question then. All in favor? Passed. Thank you for that.
I would move that we receive the report.
Seconded by Cindy. Thank you for that. Any discussion? All in favor? Pass. Thank you very much. And you know, I know I got it a little muddy, unfortunately for you, but I think you're right, Cindy. I think we have to have these discussions and get people's thoughts on the best approach moving forward. So thank you for that. Number 8, late business. Is there any late business? Nothing at all. Is there any questions or comments from the public?
Nothing in the Q&A in Zoom and no correspondence through email.
Excellent. Excellent. Oh,
I've just got one question of Michael, if I may. The corner at Angel Rock, you know where I'm talking about. So they've done kind of a tighten up sweep of that corner, and I think it's really problematic, and I've driven it like 30, 40 times so far. And is there a plan to fix that or widen it? Or, I mean, I understand how it got like it is because of the barriers and everything, but it just seems like it's just a recipe for disaster, and particularly in snow or ice.
It is a limitation of the alignment right now. Like as you see, we had to tighten up the curve because we had to get some rock catchment area there. So now we actually, with the work we did last summer, we dropped the speed limit to 50, and that curve is actually advised at I think 30. And so there has been in the past we've done that work and design to deal with Angel Rock itself. I think it was like in the range of $20 million to realign the road and get the shoulders. So there's a plan, albeit very expensive. And so I think that's another thing that the ministry is going to have to think about in terms of with the existing alignment, what we have now. What does the future of that section look like if it's not that if it's not directly dealing with Angel Rock, then it'll be like, what can we do to improve the alignment along Cameron Lake? But there's no immediate plan, so that's something we're going to have to start looking into.
So are those $5 million Tofino Highway dollars or $5 million Port of Money Highway? They're kind of different.
$5 million.
The Tofino Highway one was 5 million, turned into 200 million, but no, just kidding.
So before we go to adjournment, Michael, I just wanted, you had mentioned that you could get terms of reference for Parsons Engineering out to us so that we have an idea of how they're moving forward. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the terms of reference in the work plan.
Perfect. That would be helpful. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Michael, thank you for your support. I mean that sincerely. You know, we can't do this without you. I'd like to thank those who have traveled some distance. Dan from Tofino. I don't know if anyone else has traveled any great distance, but thank you, all of you, for being in attendance today, both here in the boardroom and on Zoom. Next meeting, do we have a date for the next meeting?
I'll ask Heather. I don't think we coordinated an exact date yet. We've been trying to navigate budget. Heather, do we have a tentative date?
We don't yet.
So we will send that out. Yes, we will send out tentative dates and coordinate via email if that is okay, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. So could I have a motion to adjourn, please? Mike, seconded by John. Thank you all. Safe travels home.
Thank you.